She is a liar, and she always has been. My father told my fiancé just 10 days before our wedding. She has a secret child, my mother whispered, leaning in close across the table so the rest of the restaurant could not hear. Do not let her trap you too. I did not argue. I did not cry. I just sat there at our rehearsal dinner sipping my wine, watching my parents try to destroy my life. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. They had no idea what was about to happen until my fiancé stood up, opened a photo on his phone, and asked them, "Is this the child?" It was. And that was the exact moment my family realized they had made the biggest mistake of their lives. My name is Maya. I am 32 years old, and I have spent my entire life being the black sheep of a family that valued social status and community optics above everything else. Before I take you through the most satisfying night of my life, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic relatives to protect your peace. Trust me, you will want to hear how this dinner ended. The private dining room at El Etoile, Atlanta's most exclusive Michelin-starred restaurant, smelled of expensive truffles and suffocating tension. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the white linen tablecloths, illuminating the stark contrast between the two families seated across from each other. On one side sat David's parents, dignified, quiet, and genuinely kind people who had built a massive real estate empire but never felt the need to flaunt it. On the other side sat my family, trying desperately to prove they belonged in this room. My older sister Chloe was holding court, performing her role as the perfect wife. Next to her sat her husband Bradley. He came from a conservative old money family, and he wore his privilege like a heavy coat. Bradley had always looked down on me, his lip perpetually curled in a slight sneer whenever I spoke. He thought Chloe was the pristine, flawless gem of our family, the standard I could never reach. If only he knew the truth about the woman sitting next to him. My mother, Beatrice, adjusted her silk shawl for the fourth time. She had spent the entire evening dominating the conversation, making sure David's parents knew exactly how prestigious our family supposedly was. She name-dropped alumni networks, elite country clubs, and charity galas. But more importantly, she was making sure they knew how fortunate I was that David was willing to marry me at all. It is just so wonderful to see Maya finally settling down. My mother announced, her voice carrying across the table. Her smile was tight, her eyes cold as they locked onto mine. We always worried about her. She was such a wild child, you know, always making things so difficult for us. David's mother, a graceful woman named Sarah, looked slightly confused. Maya has been nothing but wonderful since we met her. She is brilliant and so driven. My mother laughed, a high-pitched artificial sound that grated on my nerves. Driven is certainly one word for it. We prefer to focus on traditional family values. Take Chloe, for instance. She has been the perfect partner to Bradley. No dark pasts, no messy history, just a pure dedication to building a respectable family name. That is what really matters in our community. Chloe smiled demurely, resting a hand on Bradley's arm. I just believe a woman's true worth is in her honesty and her devotion to her family, Chloe said smoothly. Some people run away from their responsibilities when things get tough. I could never do that. I took a slow sip of my Bordeaux. The hypocrisy was so thick it was almost choking. My family was a masterclass in projection. They sat there draped in designer clothes they could barely afford, performing for an audience they desperately wanted to impress. My father, Richard, nodded along in agreement, cutting his steak with exaggerated precision. Maya has always struggled with responsibility, my father added, shaking his head with mock sadness. We tried our best to guide her, but some people simply lack the moral compass required to maintain family honor. It is why we had to be so strict. We had to protect our reputation from her reckless choices. Every word was a calculated strike. They were building a narrative, laying the groundwork for the ultimate sabotage. They wanted David and his family to see me as damaged goods, a liability, a secret ticking time bomb. This was their punishment because I had refused to bail Chloe out of her massive financial ruin 10 days ago. They thought they could break me by isolating me from the man I loved. I glanced at David. He sat beside me, His posture relaxed, his expression unreadable. He did not rush to defend me, and he did not look shocked by my parents' accusations. We had prepared for this. We knew exactly what they were going to do. David's father, Marcus, cleared his throat, trying to diffuse the mounting tension. Well, everyone has a past. What matters is the future they build together. David and Maya have built a very impressive life. My mother leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with malice. Oh, Marcus, if you only knew what it took to build that life. If you only knew the things we have had to cover up for her. A respectable family like yours deserves to know exactly who is marrying into it. You cannot build a solid future on a foundation of lies and abandonment. I set my wine glass down. The soft clink echoed loudly in the sudden quiet of the room. They were pushing harder than I expected, completely abandoning social etiquette in their desperate need to ruin me. It was almost sad watching them self-destruct. Abandonment is a very strong word, Mother. I said, my voice perfectly level. I made sure to maintain a pleasant conversational tone. I would hate for David's family to get the wrong impression. Perhaps we should focus on celebrating the wedding instead of discussing past burdens. My father scoffed, pointing his butter knife at me. Do not try to silence us, Maya. David has a right to know the truth about the burdens you created. You cannot just run away from your mistakes and pretend you are some high society professional now. You think wearing expensive clothes and managing a venture capital firm erases what you did when you were a teenager. Chloe leaned in, her eyes wide with fake sympathy. We just care about David, Maya. Bradley and I believe that marriage is built on absolute transparency. When I married Bradley, I gave him my whole heart and my whole truth. I had nothing to hide. You owe David that same respect. You cannot keep hiding your shame. Bradley nodded firmly, looking at me with absolute disdain. Chloe is right. My family values purity and honesty above all else. If my wife had a hidden past, I would have annulled the marriage immediately. A man deserves to know if his future wife carries dirty secrets. The sheer audacity of Bradley's statement almost made me laugh out loud. He sat there so arrogant and sure of his wife's pristine virtue, completely oblivious to the fact that his entire marriage was a carefully constructed sham. He thought my family was warning David out of love and morality. He had no clue that the woman holding his hand was the real liability. My mother took another sip of her champagne, clearly energized by Bradley's support. We covered for you, Maya. My mother continued, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper that was loud enough for everyone to hear. We took the shame upon ourselves to protect this family's good name. We let you run off and build your little career while we dealt with the fallout of your actions. And this is how you repay us. By deceiving this wonderful man and his family. I looked at David's parents. They were visibly uncomfortable now, exchanging worried glances. My parents were painting a picture of a monster of a teenage girl who had done something so unforgivable that it required a family cover-up. They were laying the trap perfectly. They wanted David's parents to demand answers. They wanted David to feel cornered and betrayed. It is truly tragic, my father added, shaking his head. A child is a blessing, not a mistake to be discarded when it becomes inconvenient. We raised you to have better morals than that, Maya. We gave you everything and you threw it all away in the most disgraceful manner possible. The room felt like it was shrinking. The tension was a physical weight pressing down on the table. My family had played their opening hand flawlessly. They had painted themselves as the tragic, long-suffering protectors of morality, and me as the cold-hearted villain. They were waiting for me to break. They expected me to panic, to cry, to beg them to stop, or to run out of the restaurant in shame. That was how it always worked when I was younger. They would push and push until I broke, and then they would comfort each other, reveling in their shared superiority. But I was not that scared teenager anymore. I was a 32-year-old woman who managed millions of dollars and destroyed ruthless competitors for a living. I did not break. I just smiled, knowing their entire world was about to collapse. My father noticed my smile. It infuriated him. The idea that I was not cowering, not begging for mercy, completely shattered his script. He threw his linen napkin onto the table with a sharp flick of his wrist. He stood up, towering over the dining arrangement, and turned his attention entirely away from me. David, we need to speak plainly, my father said, his voice dropping an octave into a tone of manufactured masculine solidarity. He gestured toward the plush velvet seating area, situated just a few feet away in the private dining room, perfectly within earshot of everyone at the table, but physically isolated enough to feel like an interrogation. Just you, Beatrice, and me, man to man, family to family. We cannot let this charade continue any longer. David did not look at me for permission. He did not look panicked. He simply placed his wine glass down, unbuttoned his suit jacket with fluid grace, and stood up. Of course, Richard David replied smoothly. He walked over to the velvet sofas and took a seat, crossing one leg over the other. He looked entirely in his element, a seasoned attorney holding court in his own domain. My mother practically bolted out of her chair to follow him, her silk shawl slipping off her shoulders in her haste. She sat on the sofa adjacent to David, leaning forward so aggressively she was almost invading his personal space. My father stood behind her, gripping the back of the sofa like a sentinel guarding a fragile truth. The room seemed to tilt. The shadows cast by the crystal chandelier stretched across my parents' faces, turning their desperate, eager expressions into grotesque masks. They were so consumed by their own malice, so intoxicated by the prospect of my ruin, that they failed to notice how completely undisturbed David and I were. "David, you are a brilliant man," my mother began. Her voice trembled, a masterful performance of a heartbroken matriarch carrying a terrible burden. "You come from an impeccable lineage. Your parents, Marcus and Sarah, have built a legacy of honor and respect. We simply cannot stand by and let you marry our daughter without knowing the monster she truly is." David rested his hands on his knee. "Knowing what, Beatrice?" he asked. His voice was a calm, deep river, giving absolutely nothing away. My father leaned in, lowering his voice into a harsh, conspiratorial whisper that carried clearly across the silent room. "Maya is not the career-focused, independent woman she pretends to be. 17 years ago, she got pregnant. It was a reckless, shameful mistake with some boy whose name she would not even give us. She was out of control, David. A disgrace to everything this family stands for." My mother pulled a lace handkerchief from her clutch and pressed it to her dry eyes. "She had the baby David, a little girl, and she abandoned it. She just walked away and left her own flesh and blood to the state because she did not want a child ruining her social life. We begged her to take responsibility. We offered to help, but she was completely heartless. She dumped her baby in an orphanage and never looked back." The silence that followed was absolute. At the main table, David's mother, Sarah, let out a soft gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. Marcus sat frozen, his fork suspended halfway to his plate. They looked at me with wide, horrified eyes. To them, the story sounded monstrous. To hear a mother and father say such vile things about their own daughter was shocking enough, but the accusation itself was designed to be unforgivable. Chloe could not resist the opportunity to insert herself into the spotlight. She pushed her chair back and hurried over to the seating area, kneeling beside my mother and placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "David, it breaks my heart to even talk about it," Chloe said, letting a single perfectly timed tear roll down her cheek. I tried to reason with her. I begged Maya to let me help raise the baby. I told her that family sticks together. But she just laughed at me. She said the child was a parasite draining her future. She packed her bags and moved out, leaving us to deal with the trauma of losing a niece. I cry for that poor, abandoned little girl every single year on her birthday, while Maya just goes on luxury vacations and buys expensive shoes. Bradley marched over to stand behind his wife, placing a protective hand on Chloe's head. He glared at me with absolute revulsion. "It is repulsive," Bradley declared, his voice dripping with righteous indignation. "My family values purity, honesty, and maternal devotion. If I ever discovered my wife harbored such a filthy, dirty secret, I would annul the marriage before the ink was dry. A man deserves to know if the woman carrying his name is capable of throwing away her own child like garbage. How can you trust her to bear your children, David? How do you know she will not abandon them?" The second things get difficult. I remained seated at the table, taking another slow sip of my wine. The vintage was excellent, earthy, and bold, completely untouched by the poison spilling from my family's mouths. I watched them weave their own noose. They were so confident, so utterly convinced of their own brilliance. They thought they had backed David into a corner, forcing him to choose between his family's pristine reputation and a tainted bride. They expected David to stand up in a blind rage. They expected him to throw his ring on the table, to yell at me, to demand answers. They expected a spectacular, humiliating breakup right here in this private dining room. Instead, David did nothing. He sat perfectly still on the velvet sofa. He did not gasp. He did not pull away. He did not cast a disgusted look in my direction. He simply stared at my mother, then my father, then Chloe. His gaze was sharp, analytical, and entirely devoid of the outrage they were desperately trying to provoke. "Is that so?" David asked smoothly. My father blinked, clearly thrown off balance by the tepid response. "It is the ugly truth, David. We are saving you, son. We hid this to protect her. We paid off the clinic. We handled the social fallout. We carried her sin for 17 years because we loved her. But we cannot let her infect your family. We only tell you now because you are about to sign a marriage license. You need a prenuptial agreement. Better yet, you need to walk away before she ruins your name like she ruined ours." My mother nodded vigorously, clutching her handkerchief. "We just want what is best for you, David. You deserve a woman like Chloe, a woman with a pure heart. Maya is broken inside. She has a void where her soul should be." David slowly uncrossed his legs and leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He looked over his shoulder at me. Across the room, our eyes met. It was a look of absolute, unbreakable solidarity. He offered me a faint, almost imperceptible smile before turning his attention back to my family. "A bastard child," David repeated, letting the archaic, cruel term roll off his tongue to highlight their malice. "Abandoned at an orphanage. Sent away because she was a parasite. Those are very serious, very specific allegations, Richard." My father puffed out his chest, emboldened, thinking he had finally gotten through to him. "They are facts. We lived through the nightmare. We are just trying to spare you the same fate." David's silence stretched on. The ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the corner of the room suddenly sounded like a metronome counting down to an explosion. The atmosphere in the room began to shift. The triumphant, eager energy radiating from my parents and Chloe started to curdle into something else. Confusion. Unease. David was not acting like a betrayed fiancé. He was acting like a prosecutor cross-examining a hostile witness. Bradley shifted his weight, looking at David with narrowed eyes. "Are you not hearing what they are saying, man? She had a kid and threw it in the trash. What kind of man stays with a woman like that?" David finally stood up. He smoothed the front of his tailored suit jacket, his movements unhurried and precise. He did not look angry. He looked entirely in control. He reached into the inner breast pocket of his jacket and slowly pulled out his smartphone. I watched the sweat begin to form on my father's forehead. My mother's grip on Chloe's hand tightened so much her knuckles turned white. They could feel the ground shifting beneath their feet, but they had no idea they were already in freefall. David unlocked his screen, the blue light catching the sharp angle of his jaw. To understand the absolute execution that was about to take place in this dining room, you have to rewind exactly 10 days. You have to understand what brought my parents and my sister to the point of such desperate, reckless sabotage. 10 days ago, it was a Tuesday afternoon. My venture capital firm, Crown and Roots Holdings, occupies the top 2 floors of a premier glass skyscraper in downtown Atlanta. It is a fortress of modern wealth designed to intimidate and impress. Floor-to-ceiling windows offer a commanding view of the city. Imported dark marble lines the floors, and a strict security protocol requires 3 levels of clearance just to reach the reception desk. We manage portfolios worth hundreds of millions of dollars. We do not do casual walk-ins. I was in the middle of reviewing a quarterly acquisition report when the heavy oak doors of my corner office flew open. My executive assistant, a highly trained professional named Elena, was desperately trying to block the doorway. "I am so sorry, Ms. Adams," Elena said, her face flushed with panic. "I told them you were in a restricted meeting, but they refused to wait at security and forced their way into the elevator." Pushing past Elena with the aggressive entitlement of a bulldozer was my mother. Beatrice followed closely by my father Richard and my sister Chloe. They marched into my sanctuary as if they owned the building. My mother wore a scowl that clashed with her pastel country club dress. My father puffed out his chest, attempting to project authority in a room where he had absolutely none. And then there was Chloe. Chloe strutted in wearing a loud, heavily branded designer outfit that screamed new money insecurity. She carried a luxury handbag on her arm like a shield, but to my trained eye the leather looked worn at the corners. Her smile was tight, her eyes darting around my office, taking in the panoramic view, the custom art on the walls, and the sheer scale of my operation. I could see the flash of raw, unfiltered jealousy in her expression before she quickly masked it with her usual manufactured arrogance. "That will be all, Elena," I said, not taking my eyes off my family. "Close the door behind you." The moment the heavy door clicked shut, Chloe dropped her bag onto one of my imported leather guest chairs with a heavy thud. She crossed her arms, looking down her nose at me. "Seriously, Maya?" Chloe scoffed, examining her manicured nails. "You make your own family wait in the lobby like common delivery workers. You need to train your little receptionist better." She actually asked for my identification. "I am a doctor's wife. I do not get interrogated by the help." I remained seated behind my massive desk. I did not stand to greet them. I simply closed my laptop and folded my hands. "Elena is my executive assistant," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "And she was doing her job. This is a high-security financial firm, Chloe, not a shopping mall. What are you doing here?" My mother slammed her hand down on my desk, leaning over to glare at me. "Do not take that tone with your sister. You should be honored we even took the time to come to this pretentious office of yours. We have been trying to call you for 2 days, Maya. You have been ignoring us." "I have been working," I replied calmly. "Some of us actually earn our living instead of marrying into it. What do you want, Beatrice?" My father bristled at my refusal to call her mom. "Show some respect," Richard barked, pointing a finger at me. "We are your parents. You will clear your schedule right now. We have urgent family business to discuss, and we are not leaving until you listen." I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, studying them. The aggression was a cover. I could smell the panic radiating off them. My gaze shifted back to Chloe. Despite the aggressive posturing, something was severely wrong with her. Her perfectly highlighted hair looked a bit unkempt. The foundation on her face was caked on too thick, trying to hide the deep exhaustion under her eyes. She was tapping her designer heel rapidly against the marble floor, a nervous tic she only exhibited when she was backed into a corner. Chloe was playing the arrogant, untouchable golden child, but her life was clearly unraveling at the seams. "I am busy," Chloe snapped, noticing my scrutiny. "I have a charity gala to prepare for tonight and a country club luncheon tomorrow. I do not have time to sit here and watch you play businesswoman. We need you to do what you are told for once in your miserable life." "Play businesswoman," I repeated, letting a small, sharp smile touch my lips. "I manage a venture capital fund that generated $40 million in profit last quarter alone. You are standing in a building where my signature authorizes corporate buyouts. I am not playing anything, Chloe, but you certainly are." Chloe flinched. The mask slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing a flash of sheer terror. She looked at our mother silently, pleading for backup. Beatrice immediately stepped into the breach, positioning herself between me and her precious golden child. "Stop trying to sound important, Maya," my mother sneered. "You just push numbers around on a screen. Chloe is building a real legacy. She is maintaining a high-profile marriage. She is securing our family's position in Atlanta's elite society. She has responsibilities that you could not possibly comprehend." I watched them close ranks. It was the same dynamic I had endured my entire childhood. Chloe was the sun, and the rest of us were just planets expected to burn ourselves to ash to keep her shining. But I was no longer in their orbit. I was the gravity in this room. They had not come here to scold me. They had not come here to put me in my place. They came here because they desperately needed something. The frantic, unannounced arrival, the defensive posturing, the obvious signs of Chloe's secret distress. It all pointed to one undeniable truth. They were drowning. I looked at the three of them standing awkwardly in front of my desk, trying to project power they did not possess. I checked my designer watch deliberately, making them wait in silence for 10 agonizing seconds. "You have exactly 5 minutes," I said, my voice dropping the temperature in the room. 5 minutes to tell me why you stormed past my security, disrespected my staff, and interrupted my workday. Tell me exactly what kind of mess the perfect Chloe has gotten herself into this time. Chloe's face flushed a deep, ugly red. She opened her mouth to scream at me, to hurl insults like she always did, but my father grabbed her arm and pulled her back. He gave her a stern look, silently ordering her to rein in her temper. Richard looked at me, swallowing hard, the false bravado finally melting away to reveal the desperate, ugly truth beneath it. "We need $500,000, my father said. The number hung in the sterile, climate-controlled air of my office. It was a staggering amount of money for an ordinary person, but what fascinated me was not the sum itself. It was the sheer, breathtaking audacity of the demand. My father did not ask. He did not plead. He stated the number as if he were presenting an invoice for services rendered. I did not blink. I simply picked up a silver pen from my desk and turned it over in my fingers. $500,000, I repeated, letting the words echo against the glass walls. "And what exactly am I purchasing for $500,000, Richard?" Chloe let out a jagged, frantic breath. Her arrogant posture completely collapsed. She slumped forward in the guest chair, burying her face in her hands. "She owes people, Maya," my father muttered, refusing to meet my eyes. "She made some bad investments. She got in over her head." "They are not investments," Chloe sobbed, her voice muffled by her manicured fingers. "It is debt, gambling debt." I stopped turning the pen. I looked at my sister, the pristine, perfect society wife who constantly judged everyone around her. "You have $500,000 in gambling debt?" I asked, my tone sharp with genuine disbelief. "It started small," Chloe cried, lifting her head. Her mascara was beginning to run, cracking the flawless porcelain mask she presented to the world. "You do not understand the pressure I am under, Maya. You sit up here in your corporate tower, but you have no idea what it takes to survive in Bradley's world. His family scrutinizes every single thing I do. I am the only Black woman in their entire country club circuit. I have to look perfect. I have to host the perfect galas. I have to donate the right amounts to the right charities, just so his mother does not look down her nose at me. Bradley gives me a generous allowance, but it is not enough to keep up. It is never enough." "So you started gambling," I stated, summarizing her pathetic excuse. "I thought I could double it," Chloe whimpered, twisting her diamond wedding ring frantically around her finger. "There is a private high-stakes circle in Buckhead. Some of the other wives introduced me to it. I lost a little, then I tried to win it back, and I kept losing. Then I opened offshore online accounts to try and recover the losses in secret. It just spiraled. And now Bradley's family trust is conducting a comprehensive audit of our marital assets in exactly 12 days. They demand total financial transparency before they release the next tier of his inheritance. If their accountants see the missing funds, if they see the unauthorized transfers to offshore betting sites, Bradley will find out. And if Bradley finds out," my mother interjected, her voice shaking with panic, "he will divorce her. His family values purity and perfection. A wife with a crippling gambling addiction who squandered their money. They will destroy her in court. They will strip her of everything and cast her out. She will be a laughingstock, Maya. Our entire family will be blacklisted from every elite circle in Atlanta. We will lose everything." My father took a step closer to my desk. "That is why you have to transfer the funds to Chloe's private account today. If we replace the money before the audit, the accountants will never know it was missing. The paper trail will balance out. You have millions at your disposal. 500,000 is nothing to you. Consider it a family investment." I looked at the three of them. I looked at my father, who was actively asking me to help commit financial fraud to deceive his son-in-law. I looked at my sister, a grown woman, who refused to take accountability for her own reckless greed. And I looked at my mother, who viewed this entire crisis not as a moral failing of her favorite child, but as a threat to her own social calendar. I set the silver pen down on my desk. The click sounded like a gavel falling. "I am a fiduciary," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly quiet register. "I manage venture capital. I assess risk, calculate return on investment, and fund innovation. I do not throw $500,000 into a black hole to cover up the degenerate gambling habits of a woman who just insulted my staff. I am not your personal bank, and I am certainly not going to participate in defrauding Bradley's family trust. The answer is absolutely not." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and incredibly brief. When the realization hit my mother that I was actually saying no, that I was denying them the bailout they felt entitled to, her panic instantly mutated into a vicious, unhinged rage. Beatrice lunged forward. She slammed both of her hands flat onto my desk, leaning over the polished mahogany until her face was inches from mine. Her eyes were wide, burning with a toxic mixture of desperation and raw hatred. "You ungrateful, selfish little brat!" My mother screamed, her voice echoing violently through the large office. "You will wire that money right now. Do you hear me? You will save your sister because you owe this family your very existence." I did not flinch. I did not pull back. "I owe you nothing," I replied coldly. "You owe us everything." She shrieked, the veins in her neck bulging against her pearl necklace. "You sit here in your expensive suit judging Chloe for a mistake when you are the biggest mistake this family ever made. Have you forgotten what we did for you? Have you forgotten the disgrace you brought down on our heads 17 years ago?" There it was, the ultimate weapon they always kept loaded in their arsenal. The great lie they had constructed to keep me subservient, to keep me bound to them in a perpetual state of manufactured debt. My mother jabbed a furious finger at my face. "You were a reckless, out-of-control teenager. You got yourself pregnant like some common trash from the streets. You nearly destroyed our reputation before your life even started. And what did we do? We covered it up. We protected you. We paid off the clinic to keep your name out of the local gossip. We handled the absolute nightmare of hiding your bastard child in an orphanage so you could walk away with a clean slate." My father nodded vigorously, stepping up beside his wife to reinforce the attack. "We endured the whispers, Maya. We took the burden of your sin upon our own shoulders so this family could survive. If the country club knew what you had done, Chloe would have never been accepted by Bradley's family. Her marriage, her status, her entire life was almost ruined because of your filthy behavior. We saved you from being a teenage mother with a ruined future. We gave you the freedom to build this little corporate empire of yours." Beatrice pounded her fist on my desk again. "We gave you a second chance at life. We sacrificed our peace of mind to keep your dirty secret buried. And now when your sister needs you, when the very survival of our family's social standing is on the line, you dare to sit there and act like you are better than her. You will pay this debt, Maya. You will write that check to Chloe today. Because if you do not, I swear to God, I will tear your perfect new life apart." Chloe stood up from the guest chair, her tears instantly drying up as she joined her parents in the assault. "You think you are so safe because you are marrying David soon?" Chloe sneered, wiping the smeared makeup from under her eyes. "David comes from a family just as elite as Bradley's. What do you think David will do when Mom and Dad tell him the truth about your past? What do you think his respectable, wealthy parents will say when they find out their future daughter-in-law is a deadbeat mother who threw her own baby in the trash?" My mother crossed her arms, a triumphant, malicious smile spreading across her face. She thought she had me trapped. She thought she had found the perfect leverage to extort $500,000 from my accounts. "We will tell him, Maya." My mother threatened, her voice dropping to a low, lethal whisper. "If you do not transfer that money to Chloe by the end of the day, we will go straight to David. We will sit him down and tell him every disgusting detail about the child you abandoned. We will tell his parents. We will ruin your wedding before you even send out the invitations. You will lose him. You will lose his family's backing, and you will be exactly what you were 17 years ago. A disgraced, lonely failure. So what is it going to be? I sat perfectly still, absorbing the full weight of their blackmail. They were willing to destroy my future, my happiness, and my impending marriage, just to extract a payout for Chloe's gambling addiction. They truly believed that their 17-year-old lie was the ultimate chain around my neck. They believed that the threat of exposing my non-existent shame would force me to surrender my wealth. I looked at my mother's triumphant sneer. I looked at my father's cowardly compliance. I looked at Chloe's entitled, arrogant expectation. They had no idea that their weapon was entirely useless. They had no idea that the ground they were standing on had been rigged with explosives for years, and they had just handed me the detonator. I did not break eye contact with my mother. Her chest was heaving, her breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps as she waited for me to shatter. She expected tears. She expected me to reach for my checkbook with trembling hands, desperate to buy her silence. Instead, I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the polished mahogany of my desk, and let out a soft, genuine laugh. It was a cold sound, completely devoid of humor, and it made my father take a physical step backward. "You think $500,000 will save you, Chloe?" I asked, shifting my gaze to my sister. "Let us look at the actual math, since none of you seem to understand how liabilities work. You are asking for $500,000 to clear an immediate audit. But that is just a band-aid on a gaping arterial wound. The offshore betting sites you mentioned operate with compounding daily interest rates that border on predatory. The high-stakes circle in Buckhead does not just politely ask for their money back. They use leverage. They use threats. If you owe them $500,000 today, your true debt is likely closer to $750,000 when you factor in the shadow interest and the bridge loans you undoubtedly took out to cover your tracks." Chloe opened her mouth to argue, but she had nothing to say. Her silence was a glaring confirmation. "You are a toxic asset, Chloe." I continued, my voice carrying the clinical detachment of a board meeting. "Your burn rate is unsustainable. You are maintaining a multi-million-dollar lifestyle on a restricted allowance, trying to keep pace with generational wealth that you were not born into. Even if I wired those funds to your private account right this second, you would be back in my office in 6 months begging for $1 million. The addiction is the disease. The debt is merely a symptom. Throwing my capital at a failing enterprise violates every principle of venture finance. You are a bad investment, and I do not fund bad investments." My father slammed his fist against the back of the guest chair. "This is not a business negotiation, Maya. This is your family. We are talking about your sister's survival." "No, Richard," I corrected him sharply. "We are talking about your social survival. You do not care about Chloe's mental health or her gambling addiction. You care about your country club memberships. You care about what Bradley's elite parents will say when they find out their pristine daughter-in-law is a fraud. You are willing to extort your own child to plug the holes in a sinking ship." I stood up slowly, ensuring that I towered over them from behind my desk. I smoothed the lapels of my tailored blazer, projecting absolute, immovable authority. "I am going to make this incredibly simple for all of you," I announced. "The answer is no. Not a single cent. I will not liquidate my assets to fund Chloe's gambling addiction. I will not participate in defrauding a family trust, and I will certainly not be bullied by 3 people who have absolutely no power over me." My mother let out a sound that was half shriek, half sob, her face contorted with a fury so deep it looked demonic. "You leave us no choice," she hissed, her voice vibrating with venom. "We warned you, Maya. We are leaving this building and we are going straight to David's office. We are calling Marcus and Sarah. We will tell them everything about the clinic, the paperwork, the orphanage, and the bastard child you tossed away. We will burn your wedding to the ground today. You will have nothing by nightfall." Chloe wiped her eyes, a malicious smirk returning to her face as she gathered her designer handbag. "You brought this on yourself, Maya. You could have just paid the money. Now you get to explain to your perfect fiancé why you are a monster." I walked around my desk, closing the distance until I was standing mere feet from my mother. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. True power does not shout. "Do it," I whispered. My mother froze. The sheer confidence in my voice disrupted her entire strategy. "Go ahead, Beatrice," I urged, gesturing toward the heavy oak doors of my office. "Call David. Call his parents. Call the entire alumni network and the country club while you are at it. Tell them whatever twisted, fabricated story you want. Take your best shot. But know this. When you walk out of those doors, the war you are starting is one you cannot possibly win. I am not the 15-year-old girl you locked in a room and silenced. If you drag my name through the mud, I will make sure the mud swallows you whole. My father grabbed my mother's arm, pulling her away from me. He looked genuinely rattled by my complete lack of fear, but his pride would not let him back down. "You are bluffing," he snarled. "You are terrified of losing David. Come on, Beatrice. Chloe. Let us go. We are done here. She wants to play games, we will show her how the game is played." My mother shot me one last look of absolute disgust. "You are dead to us," she spat. They turned and marched out of my office, leaving the heavy doors open behind them. I watched as they stormed past Elena's desk, their footsteps echoing down the marble corridor until the elevator doors slid shut, swallowing them whole. The office fell completely silent. The only sound was the faint, rhythmic hum of the city traffic far below my window. I did not collapse. I did not cry. I walked calmly back around my desk and sat down in my chair. I let out a long, slow breath, a deep exhalation of pure satisfaction. They had played their part flawlessly. Every threat, every admission of blackmail, every vile insult had been delivered exactly as I anticipated. I reached my hand under the thick edge of my mahogany desk. My fingers expertly traced the hidden contours of the wood until they brushed against a small, sleek piece of hardware mounted entirely out of sight. A tiny, rhythmic red light pulsed in the shadows, capturing every single word that had been spoken in this room over the last 15 minutes. With a gentle, deliberate motion, I pressed my finger against the small, tactile button. The red light blinked twice and disappeared. The audio file saved securely, uploading instantly to my encrypted cloud server. I picked up my silver pen, a genuine smile finally gracing my features. They thought they were holding a gun to my head. They did not realize I was simply waiting for them to load the evidence. I turned back to my laptop, opened my acquisition reports, and went back to work. I had a wedding to plan and a trap to spring. I sat at the rehearsal dinner table, the taste of Bordeaux lingering on my tongue, watching my mother dab at her perfectly dry eyes with her lace handkerchief. The transition from the sterile, high-stakes environment of my venture capital firm 10 days ago to this opulent dining room was jarring, yet the performance my family put on remained identical. They were still spinning their web of lies, still banking on the narrative they had constructed 17 years ago. "We did everything we could to save her," my father told David's parents, his voice thick with a carefully rehearsed sorrow. Marcus and Sarah leaned forward, completely captivated by the tragic tale of my supposed teenage rebellion. But Maya was lost to us. She refused our guidance, brought that child into the world out of wedlock, and then coldly walked away. The shame nearly broke her mother's heart. Chloe reached across the table, placing a comforting hand over my mother's. "You are so strong, Mom," Chloe murmured, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "You and Dad sacrificed so much to cover up the scandal. You protected Maya even when she did not deserve it." I listened to the symphony of their deception, my expression completely neutral. They painted themselves as the ultimate martyrs, the long-suffering family who bore the weight of a delinquent daughter. But as I looked at Chloe's flawless, expensive facade, the sterile white walls of a private medical clinic from 17 years ago flashed vividly in my mind. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when the true foundation of our family's dynamic was cemented. I was 15 years old, wearing my oversized high school uniform, sitting shivering on a cold vinyl examination chair. The air in that room smelled sharply of antiseptic and panic. But it was not my panic. It was Chloe's. 17-year-old Chloe was pacing the small clinic room, her face pale, her hands trembling as she chewed on her manicured thumbnails. She was the star cheerleader, the homecoming queen, the pristine golden child who was already being groomed to marry into Atlanta's most elite social circles. A pregnancy out of wedlock was not just a scandal. It was a death sentence to the meticulously curated image my parents had built. My mother stood blocking the clinic door, her face a mask of absolute terror and ruthless determination. She had brought us to this discreet facility hours away from our neighborhood to ensure no one from their alumni networks would recognize us. My father stood next to the exam table holding a stack of admission forms and medical release papers. "You are going to sign these, Maya," my father ordered. His voice was low, leaving absolutely no room for debate. He shoved a blue clipboard into my lap and pressed a pen into my hand. I stared down at the documents. My name, Maya Adams, was already printed at the top of the patient intake form. I looked up at my parents' confusion and fear, making my stomach twist. "I do not understand," I whispered, my 15-year-old voice cracking. "Why does this have my name on it? I am not the one who is sick." My mother marched over and gripped my shoulders, her perfectly manicured nails digging painfully into my skin. "You are not sick, and neither is your sister," she hissed, her eyes darting nervously toward the closed door. "Your sister made a mistake, a momentary lapse in judgment. But she has a brilliant future ahead of her. She has college scholarships lined up. She has prominent families looking at her. We cannot let a teenage pregnancy destroy everything she is destined to become." Chloe stopped pacing and looked at me, tears streaming down her face. "Maya, please." Chloe begged, her voice trembling with genuine desperation. "If people find out I am pregnant, my life is over. The rumors will ruin me. Mom and Dad will be a laughingstock. You have to help me. You are the only one who can fix this." I looked down at the pen in my hand, my mind struggling to process the monumental weight of what they were demanding. "You want me to pretend I am the one having a baby?" I asked, the sheer absurdity of the request bringing tears to my eyes. "Mom, I am only 15. How can I go to school? What about my life? What about my future?" My father slammed his hand down on the metal counter next to the sink, the sharp noise making both Chloe and me jump. "Do not be selfish, Maya," he barked. "You are a straight B student. You spend all your time reading in your room. You do not have the social standing or the prospects that Chloe has. Nobody cares what happens to you. If people think you got pregnant, it is just a minor disappointment. If they find out Chloe did it, is a catastrophic tragedy for this entire family." My mother released my shoulders and grabbed my hands, forcing my fingers tightly around the pen. "We will hide you," she promised, her tone shifting from aggressive to fiercely manipulative. "We will pull you out of school for a few months. We will say you are sick with mono or visiting relatives. You will stay in your room until the baby is born. We will pay the clinic extra to keep the records completely sealed under your name. When it is over, we will handle the child, and you can go back to your quiet little life. Nobody has to know the truth except us." "But it is a lie," I cried, trying to pull my hands away. "I cannot do this. Please do not make me do this. I did not do anything wrong. Why do I have to be the one to carry the shame?" "Because you owe us," my mother snarled, her patience instantly evaporating. "We feed you, we clothe you, we put a roof over your head. You have always been the difficult child, Maya. The strange one. The one who never quite fit in. For once in your miserable life, you are going to be useful. You are going to protect your sister, and you are going to protect this family's name. If you do not sign those papers right now, I will throw you out onto the street with nothing but the clothes on your back. You will be homeless, and I will make sure no one in this city ever helps you." I sat frozen on the vinyl chair, the cold seeping into my bones. I looked at Chloe, my beautiful, popular older sister, who was watching me with a mixture of relief and expectation. I looked at my father, who stared at me with cold, uncompromising authority. And I looked at my mother, whose eyes burned with a terrifying, absolute resolve to protect her favorite child at any cost. I was 15 years old. I had no money, no power, and nowhere to go. They held my entire world in their hands, and they were willing to crush me to keep Chloe shining. With a trembling hand, I lowered the pen to the clipboard. The scratching of the ink against the paper sounded impossibly loud in the small clinic room. I signed my name on the first line, then the second, Then the third. I legally bound myself to a pregnancy that was not mine. I signed away my reputation, my dignity, and my youth, transferring Chloe's burden onto my own shoulders. The moment the last signature was complete, my father snatched the clipboard from my lap. He did not say thank you. My mother let out a long breath of relief and immediately turned her attention back to Chloe, smoothing her hair and wiping her tears completely, ignoring my silent sobbing on the exam table. That was the day the narrative was born. That was the day I officially became the disgraceful, reckless black sheep of the family. Back in the present, the rich aroma of roasted duck and red wine brought me back to the elegant dining room at L'Etoile. My mother was still performing her tragedy for David's parents, her voice thick with fake emotion. It was the hardest thing we ever had to do, Beatrice was saying, pressing a hand over her heart. We tried to get her counseling. We tried to show her the right path. But Maya was just too rebellious. She insisted on having the child, and then cruelly abandoned it to an orphanage the moment it became inconvenient. We have spent 17 years trying to heal from the shame she brought upon us. Bradley shook his head, looking at me with absolute revulsion. It is truly sickening to think that you have been sitting here pretending to be a respectable woman while knowing you threw your own flesh and blood away. You should be on your knees begging for forgiveness, not drinking expensive wine with decent people. Chloe sighed dramatically, leaning her head against Bradley's shoulder. I pray for that poor little girl every day. I cannot imagine what kind of life she has had growing up in the system, knowing her mother did not want her. It is just so heartbreaking. I looked at my sister. She was playing the role of the compassionate, grieving aunt flawlessly. She was sitting in a designer dress, wearing expensive jewelry, married to a man of high society, actively condemning me for abandoning the very child she had pushed out of her own body. The psychological gymnastics required to maintain such a delusion were staggering. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my wine, savoring the rich flavor. The contrast between the horrific lie they were telling and the serene, unwavering calm radiating from David and me was beginning to make the air in the room crackle with tension. My family thought they were putting the final nails in my coffin. They thought they were burying me under the weight of an inescapable past. They did not know that I had spent the last 5 years digging up the truth. They did not know that the grave they dug for me 17 years ago was about to become their own. I remember the night the baby was born. We were not at a hospital. My parents had arranged for a private off-the-books delivery at a secluded property they rented 2 counties over. Chloe screamed and cried, cursing our mother, cursing the pain, cursing the inconvenience of it all. I sat in the hallway, clutching my knees to my chest, listening to the birth of the child that would officially become my lifelong sentence. When the baby finally arrived, a healthy, quiet little girl, there was no celebration. There were no tears of joy. There was only clinical, ruthless efficiency. My mother wrapped the infant in a standard-issue hospital blanket. She did not let Chloe hold her. She did not look at the baby with a grandmother's love. She looked at her like a piece of incriminating evidence that needed to be destroyed. I watched from the doorway as my father handed a thick envelope of cash to the private midwife. Then my parents placed the baby in a generic car seat. "Where is she going?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. My father did not even glance my way. "Somewhere far from here," he said coldly. "A state facility on the other side of the border. We are putting her into the foster system as a completely anonymous drop-off. No paper trail, no adoption agencies asking questions. She will be a ward of the state, and this family will be washed clean of the entire ordeal." I felt a cold horror wash over me. "You are putting her in foster care," I gasped, stepping forward. "Mom, you cannot do that. She is your granddaughter. You said you were going to find a nice family for her. You promised Chloe." My mother turned to me, her eyes dead and dark. "Do not ever call her my granddaughter again, Maya. She is a mistake, and you do not get to dictate how we clean up mistakes. You signed the papers. As far as the law is concerned, she was yours and you abandoned her. Now go get in the car. We are going home, and we are never speaking of this night again." But they did speak of it. They spoke of it constantly, just never to my face. The social execution began almost immediately. Within weeks, the whispered conversations started echoing through the marble halls of the country club and the manicured lawns of our suburban neighborhood. My parents were masters of the calculated leak. They would pull an aunt aside at a family barbecue or corner a prominent fraternity brother at an alumni gala and pour out their fake bleeding hearts. "It is Maya," my mother would confide, dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue. "She got pregnant. She was sneaking out acting wild. We tried to give her guidance, we tried to support her, but she just completely rebelled. She had the baby and coldly surrendered it to the state. She did not even want to hold the poor thing. Richard and I are just devastated. We raised her better than this." The rumors spread like wildfire. In the elite, tight-knit circles of affluent Black Atlanta, reputation is currency. And my currency was immediately bankrupted. Extended family members stopped looking me in the eye. When I walked into a room during Thanksgiving or Christmas dinners, conversations would abruptly stop. My cousins were told to stay away from me because I was a bad influence. Aunts who used to pinch my cheeks now pulled their purses closer when I walked by. Chloe, meanwhile, was elevated to the status of a living saint. She returned to her senior year of high school, glowing and pristine, securing her spot as valedictorian and accepting a full scholarship to a prestigious university. She played the role of the traumatized older sister perfectly, telling her friends how hard it was to watch her younger sister throw her life away. She soaked up the sympathy and the praise, stepping directly on my neck to boost herself higher. For 3 years, I lived as a ghost in my own home. My parents stripped my bedroom of anything personal. I was not allowed to attend family vacations. I was forbidden from showing my face when they hosted their lavish dinner parties. I was confined to my room, a prisoner serving a sentence for a crime I did not commit. The psychological toll was suffocating. If you are told every single day that you are a disgrace, that you are lucky to even have a roof over your head, you eventually start to believe it. My mother perfected the art of gaslighting. Whenever I tried to defend myself, whenever I dared to bring up the truth of what happened in that clinic, she would look at me with genuine, terrifying pity. "Are you losing your mind, Maya?" she would ask, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Chloe has never been pregnant. Look at her. She's a star student. You are the one who ruined your life. You are the one who signed the papers. Stop trying to blame your sister for your own disgusting choices. It is pathetic." They said it so often and with such unwavering conviction that there were nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had actually lost my grip on reality. I was entirely isolated. No friends, no support system, no one to validate the truth. Just the crushing weight of their collective disgust. The final blow came on the morning of my 18th birthday. I had just graduated high school the day before. Neither of my parents had attended the ceremony. I had walked across the stage, accepted my diploma, and looked out into a sea of cheering families, knowing that not a single person in that auditorium was clapping for me. I had walked home alone in my graduation gown. When I woke up on my birthday, I found 2 large trash bags sitting in the hallway outside my bedroom door. They were stuffed with my clothes and whatever meager belongings I had left. My father was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. He was dressed for a golf outing, looking incredibly relaxed. He checked his watch as I slowly walked down the steps. "You are legally an adult today, Maya," he said, his voice completely devoid of emotion. "Your mother and I have fulfilled our legal obligation to house you. You are a stain on this family, and we will not allow your presence to jeopardize Chloe's future any longer. She is joining a prominent sorority this fall and meeting young men from important families. We cannot have a delinquent deadbeat mother living in our basement dragging her down." My mother stepped out of the kitchen sipping a cup of coffee. She did not even look at me. She just stared out the window at her pristine front lawn. "Take your trash and get out," she said coldly. "Do not call us. Do not ask for money. Do not tell anyone you are related to us. As far as we are concerned, we only have one daughter." I stood there, an 18-year-old girl with absolutely nothing. No savings account. No college fund. No safety net. I looked at the 2 people who were supposed to protect me, realizing that they felt absolutely zero remorse. They were throwing me onto the street without a second thought, completely secure in the belief that they had successfully buried their secret forever. I picked up the 2 trash bags. I did not cry. The tears had dried up years ago. I walked out the front door, leaving my keys on the entryway table, and I stepped out into the blinding summer heat. I spent my first few nights sleeping in a 24-hour laundromat. I worked 3 minimum wage jobs just to afford a closet-sized room in a dangerous part of town. I ate canned soup and walked miles in the rain because I could not afford bus fare. I fought tooth and nail for every single inch of ground I gained. I built a multi-million-dollar corporate empire from absolute scratch, fueled entirely by the burning white-hot desire to prove that I was not the garbage they threw away. And as I sat at the rehearsal dinner table listening to them spin their pathetic fabricated tale of woe to David's parents, I felt a deep, profound sense of peace. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully erased me and hidden Kiara away in the foster system forever. They thought they had committed the perfect crime. But they were wrong. Bradley was still staring at me across the white linen tablecloth, his face twisted in a mask of moral superiority. "How do you sleep at night, Maya?" he demanded, shaking his head. "How do you look in the mirror, knowing you left a defenseless child in a state facility to rot? You are a cold, calculated sociopath. I am honestly sick to my stomach just sitting at the same table as you." Chloe squeezed Bradley's hand, nodding in solemn agreement. "We pray for her soul, Bradley. But some people are just born broken. We have to protect ourselves from her." David finally uncrossed his legs. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees, and looked directly at my father. The silence in the private dining room deepened, the kind of silence that precedes a devastating storm. David reached into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket and slowly, deliberately pulled out his smartphone. The air in the room seemed to freeze. My mother stopped dabbing her eyes. My father's jaw tightened. Chloe's fake sympathy faltered, replaced by a sudden, inexplicable flash of unease. They watched David's hands, their confidence finally showing the first microscopic hairline fractures. "Is that so?" David asked, his voice echoing loudly in the quiet space. He unlocked the screen of his phone. The bright display illuminated the sharp, dangerous smile forming on his lips. "Then let us talk about that defenseless child. Let us talk about exactly who abandoned who." He turned the screen of his phone around to face my parents and Chloe. The bright display sliced through the dim, ambient lighting of the private dining room. On the screen was a high-resolution photograph of a stunning 17-year-old girl. She had flawless, dark skin, piercing eyes that held an unmistakable resemblance to our family lineage, and she was wearing a graduation gown from one of the most prestigious preparatory academies on the East Coast. She looked radiant, healthy, and unequivocally loved. "Is this the child?" David asked, his voice deathly quiet, but echoing like a gunshot in the silent room. "Is this the helpless, discarded infant you claim Maya threw into the trash?" My father squinted at the screen, his brow furrowing in genuine confusion. My mother leaned in, her eyes narrowing as she tried to comprehend what she was looking at. Chloe just stared, a flicker of uneasy recognition flashing across her features before she masked it with indignation. "What game are you playing, David?" my father demanded, his voice wavering as he tried to maintain his authoritative posture. "We have no idea who that teenager is. We are talking about a baby that was abandoned 17 years ago. Are you trying to deflect from Maya's crimes with some random picture?" David did not put the phone away. He kept it held up, forcing them to look at the vibrant, successful young woman on the screen. "You do not recognize her," David stated, a cold, disgusted smile touching his lips. "Of course you do not. Because you never bothered to look back after you handed an envelope of cash to a private midwife and drove away. But let me assure you, Richard, this is exactly who we are talking about." Chloe's breath hitched. She stared at the phone again, her eyes suddenly locking onto a specific detail in the photograph. Her face, previously flushed with righteous indignation, drained entirely of color. "Where did you get that picture?" Chloe whispered, her voice trembling violently. She was not looking at the girl's face anymore. She was looking at what the girl was wearing. Before David could answer, I finally broke my silence. I set my wine glass down and looked directly at my sister, letting the absolute certainty of my victory settle over the table. "You do not need to ask David about the photograph, Chloe," I said smoothly. "If you want to know about her, you can ask her yourself." As if on cue, the heavy mahogany double doors of the VIP dining room swung open. The sudden movement drew every eye in the room. The waitstaff who had been hovering nervously near the walls parted instantly. Standing in the doorway was Kiara. She was no longer wearing the graduation gown from the photograph. Instead, she was dressed in a breathtaking floor-length emerald silk gown that commanded absolute attention. She carried herself with a regal, untouchable grace, a poise that I had spent the last 5 years carefully cultivating in her. She looked like royalty stepping into a room full of peasants. But it was not the dress that made Bradley gasp out loud. It was not her staggering beauty that made my mother let out a strangled, horrified noise. It was what rested against Kiara's collarbone. Sparkling under the crystal chandeliers was a heavy vintage diamond and sapphire heirloom necklace. Bradley bolted upright from his chair, the wooden legs scraping violently against the floor. "What the hell is this?" Bradley roared, pointing a shaking finger at Kiara. He turned to Chloe, his face twisted in absolute fury and confusion. "Chloe, that is my grandmother's necklace. The necklace my family gave you on our wedding day. You told me it was securely locked in the bank vault. Why is this stranger wearing my family's heirloom?" Chloe looked like she was going to vomit. She clutched the edge of the dining table, her knuckles white, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. She was completely paralyzed by the sheer impossibility of what was happening. She knew exactly why Kiara was wearing that necklace, but she could not say it. She could not admit the truth in front of Bradley. "She is wearing it because it belongs to her now, Bradley." I answered for my sister, my voice ringing out clearly over the chaotic murmurs of the room. "Chloe did not lock your grandmother's priceless heirloom in a bank vault. She pawned it 3 years ago to pay off a massive illegal gambling debt to a private betting ring in Buckhead. She sold your family's legacy for pennies on the dollar to save her own skin." David casually slipped his phone back into his pocket. "Maya tracked down the broker who bought the pawn ticket," David explained to a horrified Bradley. "She paid triple the market value to recover the necklace. And then she gave it to her ward as a graduation present. A fitting gift considering the circumstances." My father lunged forward, trying to grab control of the collapsing narrative. "Lies. All of it," he shouted, his face purple with rage. "You hired some actress to wear a fake necklace to disrupt this dinner. You are insane, Maya. Sarah Marcus, do not listen to this garbage. She is trying to deflect from her own sins." Kiara did not flinch at my father's screaming. She walked slowly, elegantly into the center of the dining room. She stopped just a few feet away from where Chloe was hyperventilating. She looked at Richard and Beatrice, her biological grandparents, with absolute freezing contempt. Then her gaze shifted to Chloe. The silence in the room was deafening. Every single person, including David's parents, held their breath. Kiara tilted her head, a perfect mocking imitation of the condescending look Chloe used so often. "It is a beautiful necklace," Kiara said, her voice confident and smooth. "It feels much better around my neck than it ever did around yours." She paused, letting the weight of the moment crush the air out of my sister's lungs. "Hello, biological mother." The camera glides in a slow, deliberate circle around the private dining room, capturing the suffocating weight of the silence. Every micro-expression is magnified under the warm glow of the crystal chandeliers. Marcus and Sarah sit frozen, their untouched wine glasses reflecting the candlelight. Their faces are portraits of upper-class shock, paralyzed by the sheer vulgarity of the scandal being unpacked over a Michelin star meal. They are decent, conservative people who avoid public drama at all costs, and my parents are playing their sensibilities like a finely tuned instrument. My mother Beatrice reaches across the velvet seating area to gently touch Sarah's hand. It is a masterful, calculated gesture of maternal solidarity. "We did not want to burden you with this ugliness," Beatrice whispers, her voice quivering with exactly the right amount of manufactured heartbreak. "We carried this shame in absolute secrecy for 17 years. Richard and I aged a decade in a single summer trying to clean up Maya's mess. But when we realized she was actually going to marry David without confessing her sins, we knew we could not stay silent." A mother knows Sarah. I could not let your son bind his pristine reputation to a woman who discarded her own flesh and blood like a piece of garbage. Sarah pulls her hand back just a fraction of an inch, her eyes darting toward me. I sit at the main table, my posture impeccably straight, my expression an unreadable mask. To Sarah, my calmness must look like the cold, calculating sociopathy my mother is describing. My father sighs heavily, rubbing his face as if the burden of my existence is physically crushing him. We provided her with every advantage, Richard says, pitching his voice to echo the weary disappointment of a patriarch who has done everything right. We sent her to the best private schools. We surrounded her with excellence. Chloe thrived under our roof. She embraced our values and built a beautiful, respectable life with Bradley. But Maya was always drawn to the gutter. She was rebellious, secretive, and entirely devoid of a moral compass. When she got pregnant, she refused to tell us who the father was. Some delinquent boy, no doubt. We offered to raise the child ourselves to hide the scandal and protect the baby, but she would not hear of it. She wanted zero attachments. She dropped the child off at a state facility the moment she was discharged from the clinic and vanished. She did not even shed a tear. The circular track of the camera captures Chloe's face next. She has her hands clasped under her chin, her eyes wide and shimmering with unshed tears. It is truly sickening, Chloe adds, her voice catching perfectly. I tried to be a big sister to her. I tried to guide her. I even begged her to let me adopt the baby. I told her that family takes care of family. But she just laughed at me. She said the baby was a parasite ruining her youth. She packed a bag and left us to deal with the agonizing grief of a lost niece. We never saw that little girl. We do not even know if she is alive. Bradley scoffs loudly, his arms crossed tight over his chest. He leans back in his chair, looking at me with pure, unadulterated disgust. It makes my stomach turn just sitting in the same room as her, Bradley declares, making sure David hears every word. My family has spent generations building a name synonymous with integrity and Christian values. Chloe brought nothing but grace and purity into my lineage. If I had discovered she harbored a secret like this, I would have dragged her to a judge and annulled the marriage that very day. A woman who abandons her own child is capable of anything, David. She will lie to you, she will use your wealth, and the second you face hardship, she will walk out on you, just like she walked out on that baby. You are marrying a ghost man. There is nothing inside her. Marcus finally speaks, his voice low and troubled. He looks at David, who remains seated on the velvet sofa, his face completely impassive. David Marcus begins, his tone heavy with paternal concern. Is this true? Did you know any of this? Marriage is built on a foundation of absolute trust. If Maya has hidden something of this magnitude from you, from us, we need to halt this wedding immediately. We can handle the social fallout of a cancelled engagement. We cannot handle the fallout of a fraudulent marriage. My parents practically vibrate with triumph. They have done it. They have successfully weaponized Marcus and Sarah's conservative values. They have isolated me, painting me as a radioactive asset that needs to be disposed of immediately. Beatrice shoots a quick, triumphant glance at Richard. It is a microscopic smirk, a fleeting moment of victory that screams they won and I am ruined. They expect David to crumble. They expect him to stand up, his face red with humiliation, and demand an explanation. They are waiting for the spectacular, fiery end of my relationship, eager to watch me pack my bags and crawl back into the obscurity they banished me to 17 years ago. But I am not looking at David. I am looking directly at my mother. I take a slow, deliberate sip of my wine, savoring the rich, earthy notes of the Bordeaux. The utter tranquility of my movements causes my mother's victorious smirk to falter slightly. She hates that I am not crying. She hates that I am not begging David to stay. David remains perfectly still on the velvet sofa. He does not look at his parents. He does not look at my father. He simply adjusts his cuffs, his movements unhurried and precise. The suffocating tension in the room begins to shift, twisting into something heavy and dangerous. The triumphant energy radiating from my family curdles into a sudden, inexplicable dread as David prepares to break his silence. David did not speak immediately. He let the silence stretch out, allowing the toxic air to circulate through the private dining room. His quietness acted as an amplifier, forcing my family to fill the void. Chloe, interpreting his silence as the paralyzing shock of a man realizing he was engaged to a monster, decided to push the knife in even deeper. She leaned heavily into her performance. She pressed a manicured hand to her chest, her breathing suddenly hitching in a flawless imitation of a panic attack. Bradley immediately wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close against his side. She buried her face in his tailored suit jacket, her shoulders shaking with manufactured silent sobs. "It still haunts me," Chloe whispered. Her voice was muffled against Bradley's shoulder, trembling with exactly the right amount of trauma. "Every single day I think about that poor little girl. I wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, wondering if she is hungry, if she is scared, if she wonders why her mother threw her away like garbage." I begged Maya. I literally got on my knees and begged her not to leave the baby at that state facility. I told her I would raise the child myself. I told her family takes care of family. But she just looked at me with those cold eyes and said the baby was a parasite ruining her youth. Bradley kissed the top of Chloe's head, glaring at me with a mixture of profound pity for his wife and pure unadulterated venom for me. "You have such a pure heart, darling," he murmured to her, pitching his voice so it carried perfectly to David and his parents. "You cannot comprehend how someone could be so wicked, because you are full of light. You have to stop carrying her sins. Maya's darkness is not your burden." He turned his piercing gaze toward David, adopting the patronizing, authoritative tone of a man who believed his wealth and lineage gave him moral supremacy. "Listen to me, David, man to man. You are looking at a woman who is fundamentally broken. My family, much like yours, relies on the strength and moral fortitude of the women who carry our name. A mother is the foundation of an empire. When I look at Chloe, I see a woman who would gladly sacrifice everything for her family. When I look at Maya, I see a void. I see a liability that will completely destroy the Thornton legacy the moment she gets bored or overwhelmed." Bradley shook his head, an expression of aristocratic disappointment masking his face. "If you marry her, you will never sleep soundly. You will always wonder if the woman holding your children is capable of walking out the door and never looking back. A woman who can abandon her own flesh and blood in a state-run orphanage does not have the capacity for love. She is a parasite mimicking human emotion. You need to end this tonight, right here, before she infects your bloodline." My mother seized the momentum Bradley had generated. She reached across the velvet seating area again, her eyes shining with unshed, expertly produced tears. "Bradley is absolutely right, David. We tried to fix her. We sent her to the best therapists in Atlanta. We prayed over her. But Maya has always been entirely selfish. Look at her right now. Look at how cold she is. We are sitting here agonizing over the deepest trauma of our family's history, and she is just sitting there drinking wine. She feels absolutely zero remorse for destroying a child's life." The atmosphere in the room grew incredibly dense. The air felt heavy, pressing down on my shoulders, thick with the collective judgment of the people who were supposed to protect me. In a normal dynamic, this was the exact moment the scapegoat crumbled. This was the calculated climax of their psychological warfare. The sheer weight of the unified front, the overwhelming combination of my parents' fake grief, Chloe's theatrical tears, and Bradley's harsh, uncompromising moral condemnation was perfectly designed to snap my spine. They were waiting for the breakdown. They wanted the tears. They wanted the panicked, desperate denials that would only make me look more guilty and unhinged. They wanted me to fall to my knees and beg David not to listen to them. They wanted me to shatter into a million pieces right here on the plush carpet of the VIP dining room, so they could sweep me up and throw me out with the trash. Sarah, David's mother, looked physically ill. She clutched her pearl necklace, her gaze darting frantically between my serene face and my mother's weeping one. Marcus had pushed his chair back slightly, a subconscious physical retreat from the toxicity flooding the table. They were thoroughly spooked. My family had successfully painted a portrait of a monster, and they had hung it right over my head. Chloe peeked out from Bradley's shoulder, dabbing her eyes with a silk tissue. She looked directly at me, and for a fraction of a second, The weeping, traumatized sister vanished. In her eyes, I saw the ruthless, triumphant gleam of the golden child who believed she had just secured her throne. She thought she had won. She thought the 17-year-old lie was officially cemented as absolute truth. She thought she had saved her marriage, her status, and her pristine reputation by feeding me to the wolves. I just want you to get help, Maya. Chloe whimpered seamlessly, slipping back into her performance. I just want you to find whatever piece of your soul is missing. But we cannot let you ruin David's life the way you ruined ours. We love him too much to let you drag him into your darkness. My father nodded solemnly, crossing his arms over his chest. We are done protecting you, Maya. The truth is out. The charade is over. It is time for you to face the consequences of your actions. I slowly lowered my wine glass to the table. The crystal base made a soft, definitive sound against the fine china plate. I smoothed a non-existent wrinkle from my tailored skirt, my movements perfectly measured. I had spent the last decade sitting across from ruthless corporate raiders and hostile acquisition boards. I had learned how to breathe through fire. This pathetic theatrical display was nothing compared to the boardrooms I conquered daily. I did not break eye contact with Chloe. I let the silence stretch, letting them bask in their perceived victory for a few more seconds. I let them savor the sweet taste of their triumph, knowing it would make the ashes of their destruction taste that much more bitter. David finally shifted his weight on the velvet sofa. The subtle movement drew every eye in the room. He did not look shocked. He did not look disgusted. He looked exactly like a corporate litigator who had just allowed the opposing counsel to completely perjure themselves on the stand. He had let them talk. He had let them build a towering, magnificent house of cards, and now he was ready to pull the bottom card away. The velvet fabric of the sofa yielded as David stood to his full height. He took a slow breath, adjusting his cuffs, with the meticulous, unbothered precision of a man who held every single winning card in the deck. I watched a faint, knowing smile touch the corners of his mouth. It matched my own. We were completely synchronized. Bradley crossed his arms tighter, his chin jutting out. He was waiting for David to shake his hand to thank him for saving him from a disastrous marriage. Instead, David looked at Bradley with a gaze so intensely cold it could have frozen water. You speak quite a bit about purity and honesty, Bradley, David said. His voice was a deep, resonant baritone that filled the private dining room, commanding absolute authority. You claim your family values transparency above all else. You demand to know the secrets of the woman sitting across from you. But I find it fascinating how easily you swallow a story without asking for a single shred of actual evidence. A good lawyer never accepts a narrative just because it is delivered with tears. Tears are the cheapest currency in the world. Bradley uncrossed his arms, his face flushing a deep, angry red. Are you calling them liars, David? They are her own parents. Why would a mother invent a story about her daughter abandoning a child? It defies all logic. That is exactly what we are going to find out, David replied smoothly. He turned his back on Bradley, dismissing him entirely, and focused his attention on my parents. Richard and Beatrice suddenly looked less like triumphant martyrs and more like trapped animals. The script they had written in their heads was burning to ash right in front of them. David was supposed to be the victim here. He was supposed to be the outraged fiancé demanding answers from me. Instead, he was treating them like hostile witnesses. Let us make sure I have the facts perfectly straight, David continued, pacing slowly across the plush carpet. 17 years ago, Maya became pregnant. She carried the child to term. She delivered the baby at a private off-the-books clinic, and then against your desperate, tearful pleas, she callously dumped this infant at a state-run orphanage. You, acting as the benevolent, heartbroken grandparents, paid off the medical staff to protect her name. You carried this agonizing secret for nearly 2 decades. Is that your official testimony tonight? My father swallowed hard. The muscle in his jaw twitched. He looked at David, then at his own wife, searching for reassurance. Yes, Richard stated, trying to inject his voice with masculine bravado. That is exactly what happened. We have the banking records to prove we paid the clinic. We did it to save her. And you, Chloe, David said, pivoting slightly to look down at my sister. You begged Maya to let you raise this child. You offered to take the baby in as your own, because family takes care of family. You have spent the last 17 years weeping for a lost niece that you never got to know. Is that correct? Chloe gripped Bradley's hand. She forced her chin up, playing the brave wounded sister one last time. Yes, Chloe whispered, her voice trembling beautifully. I would have loved that little girl with all my heart. I still pray for her every single day. I just want to know she is safe. David stopped pacing. He stood perfectly still in the center of the room. The absolute silence that followed was deafening. Even the waitstaff hovering near the walls seemed to hold their breath. The trap was set. The steel jaws were open, and my family had just willingly stepped inside, confirming every single detail of their fabricated reality in front of a room full of witnesses. That is a very moving story, David said softly. It has all the elements of a classic tragedy: betrayal, sacrifice, a lost child, and a saintly sister. There is only one minor issue with your timeline, Chloe. Chloe frowned, her fake tears drying up instantly. What issue? David reached into the inner breast pocket of his tailored suit jacket. He did not rush. He let the anticipation stretch their nerves until they were practically screaming. He pulled out his smartphone. The sleek device caught the light from the crystal chandeliers overhead. He unlocked the screen, his thumb swiping once, twice, before he found exactly what he was looking for. The issue, David said, his voice dropping to a low, lethal register, is that you are grieving for a ghost that does not exist. You claim you spend your days weeping for a discarded anonymous ward of the state. But I assure you, nobody in this room needs to lose any sleep over her safety. He stepped forward, closing the distance between himself and my family. He stopped right in front of the velvet sofa where my mother, my father, and my sister were sitting. He turned his phone around, the bright display slicing through the dim, romantic lighting of the dining room. He held the screen steady, forcing Richard, Beatrice, and Chloe to look at the image glowing in his hand. On the screen was a high-resolution photograph of a breathtakingly beautiful 17-year-old girl. She had flawless, glowing dark skin and piercing, intelligent eyes that held an undeniable genetic resemblance to the Addams family lineage. She was standing proudly in a sunlit courtyard, wearing the deep crimson graduation gown of an elite, highly exclusive preparatory academy. Her smile was radiant, healthy, and full of absolute confidence. She looked like a young woman who had never known a day of neglect in her entire life. She looked unequivocally, fiercely loved. My father squinted at the screen, his brow furrowing in genuine confusion. He had not seen the baby since the night he handed cash to the midwife. He was looking at a teenager he did not recognize. My mother leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as her brain desperately tried to comprehend the image in front of her. The story she had repeated for 17 years was so deeply ingrained in her psyche that seeing a successful, thriving teenager completely short-circuited her mind. But Chloe saw it. Chloe stared at the glowing screen, her breath catching audibly in her throat. Her eyes locked onto the girl's face, mapping the familiar curve of her jaw, the specific shape of her eyes. It was like looking into a temporal mirror. The resemblance to her own teenage self was staggering, an undeniable biological echo that could not be faked or dismissed. Chloe's face, previously flushed with righteous indignation, drained entirely of color. She looked as though all the blood had suddenly rushed to her feet. "Is this the child?" David asked. His voice cut through the suffocating silence, striking like a physical blow. "Is this the helpless, discarded infant you claim Maya threw into the trash?" The silence that answered him was absolute. My father stared open-mouthed. My mother's hands began to shake violently, the lace handkerchief fluttering to the carpeted floor. Chloe looked physically ill, her manicured fingers digging into the velvet upholstery of the sofa as she tried to anchor herself to a reality that was rapidly dissolving. David did not pull the phone away. He kept it right in their faces, forcing them to look at the living, breathing proof of their 17-year-old lie. He was daring them to speak, daring them to continue the charade while staring directly at the truth. They had built a towering monument of lies to destroy me, and David had just shattered the foundation with a single photograph. Before anyone could formulate a lie to explain away the photograph, a sharp, heavy click echoed through the private dining room. The polished brass handles of the double mahogany doors turned simultaneously. The heavy wood swung open, pulled back by two waiters who immediately stepped aside, their eyes lowered in professional deference. The air in the room seemed to rush out into the hallway. Standing in the threshold was the living, breathing incarnation of my family's greatest sin and my greatest triumph. It was Kiara. She did not look like a tragic secret. She did not look like a discarded burden. She looked like royalty stepping into a room full of peasants. She wore a floor-length emerald silk gown that draped flawlessly over her frame, the rich deep green fabric perfectly complementing her glowing dark skin. Her hair was styled in an elegant, intricate updo, framing a face that was strikingly beautiful and terrifyingly familiar. She carried a silver clutch in one hand, her posture perfectly straight, her chin held high with an unshakable quiet confidence that I had spent the last 5 years carefully cultivating in her. David's parents, Marcus and Sarah, stared at her in absolute awe. The sheer presence of this young woman instantly annihilated the grotesque picture my parents had painted just moments before. This was no feral, neglected ward of the state. This was a young woman raised with immense privilege, profound love, and absolute security. My mother let out a strangled, breathless sound. It was the noise of a woman watching the ghost she thought she buried claw its way out of the grave and walk right into her Michelin-starred dinner. My father gripped the edge of the dining table so hard, the veins in his forearms bulged against his tailored suit. They were completely paralyzed. But Chloe looked like she was standing on the gallows trapdoor waiting for the lever to be pulled. She stared at Kiara, her eyes wide, tracking every feature of the girl's face. The genetic echo was undeniable. Looking at Kiara was like looking at a pristine, uncorrupted version of Chloe from 17 years ago, before the gambling, the lies, and the desperate social climbing had hollowed her out. Kiara stepped into the room. The soft rustle of her emerald silk gown was the only sound. She did not look nervous. She did not seek my approval or look to David for direction. She walked with the absolute certainty of a young woman who knew exactly who she was and exactly how much power she held in this room. She stopped just a few feet away from the velvet sofa where my family sat frozen. Bradley, who had been glaring at David moments before, shifted his gaze to the new arrival. He opened his mouth, likely to demand who this teenager was and why she was interrupting a private family dinner. But the words died in his throat. His eyes did not stay on Kiara's face. His gaze dropped to her collarbone, and the blood drained completely from his arrogant features. Resting perfectly against Kiara's dark skin, sparkling brilliantly under the warm light of the crystal chandeliers, was a heavy vintage diamond and sapphire necklace. It was a breathtaking piece of jewelry, intricately designed with a massive teardrop sapphire surrounded by flawless antique cut diamonds. It was not just an expensive accessory, it was a museum-quality heirloom. It was the Thornton family legacy. Bradley bolted upright from his chair. The sudden violent movement sent his heavy wooden chair scraping harshly against the floorboards. He pointed a shaking finger at Kiara, his face twisting into a mask of absolute fury and profound confusion. "What is the meaning of this?" Bradley roared, his voice cracking with shock. He spun around to face Chloe, who was practically hyperventilating on the sofa. "Chloe, that is my grandmother's necklace. That is the Thornton family heirloom we presented to you on the eve of our wedding. You swore to me it was locked securely in our private bank vault downtown. Why is this stranger wearing my family's legacy?" Chloe could not speak. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly like a fish pulled out of water. She clutched her chest, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the fabric of her expensive dress. She was completely paralyzed by the sheer, devastating impossibility of what was happening right in front of her husband. She knew exactly why Kiara was wearing that necklace. She knew the dark, shameful journey that piece of jewelry had taken. But she could not admit the truth. To speak the truth was to sign her own execution warrant. I watched my sister suffocate under the weight of her own deception. The poetic justice of the moment was so exquisite, so perfectly calibrated, that I allowed myself a slow, genuine smile. I set my wine glass down and stood up from the table. My movements were unhurried, commanding the attention of everyone in the room. "She cannot answer you, Bradley," I said, my voice ringing out clearly over the chaotic, panicked breathing of my family. "So I will answer for her. Chloe did not lock your grandmother's priceless heirloom in a bank vault. She has not possessed that necklace for over 3 years." Bradley turned to me, his eyes wide with a mixture of rage and denial. "That is impossible. I pay the vault fees. I have the documentation." "You have a piece of paper," I corrected him smoothly. "Chloe has an addiction. 3 years ago, your pristine, perfect wife accrued a massive illegal debt to a private sports betting ring in Buckhead. The men running that circle do not accept apologies or promises. They demand capital. To save her own skin, to keep you from finding out she was gambling away your money, Chloe took the Thornton family legacy to a high-end, discreet pawnbroker. She sold your grandmother's diamonds for pennies on the dollar to cover her losses." Bradley stumbled backward, hitting the edge of the dining table. He looked at Chloe, desperate for her to deny it, to scream that I was lying. But Chloe just sobbed, covering her face with her trembling hands. Her silence was a deafening confession. David casually slipped his phone back into his pocket and stepped to my side. "Maya's firm monitors significant asset movements in the city." David explained, his tone conversational, as if he were discussing the weather rather than destroying a marriage. When the broker attempted to quietly auction the piece to international buyers, Maya recognized it immediately. She intervened. She paid triple the market value out of her own pocket to recover the necklace before it disappeared to a private collector overseas. I looked at Kiara, who gave me a subtle, affectionate nod. "I bought it back," I told Bradley, holding his horrified gaze. "Not to protect Chloe, but because it belonged to a family that was being deceived. I kept it safe in my own vault. And today, I gave it to my ward as a graduation present. A fitting gift for a young woman of actual character, wouldn't you agree?" My father lunged forward from the sofa, desperately trying to grab control of the rapidly collapsing narrative. "Lies," he shouted, his face purple with rage. "All of it. You hired some actress to wear a fake necklace to disrupt this dinner. You are insane, Maya. Sarah Marcus, do not listen to this garbage. She is a pathological liar trying to deflect from her own sins." Kiara did not flinch at my father's screaming. She did not seek refuge behind me. She walked slowly, elegantly, right into the center of the dining room. She stopped just a few feet away from where Chloe was weeping into her hands. She looked at Richard and Beatrice, the biological grandparents who had thrown her away like trash, with an expression of absolute freezing contempt. Then her gaze shifted down to Chloe. The silence in the room returned, heavier and darker than before. Everyone, including David's parents, held their breath. Kiara tilted her head. It was a perfect, mocking imitation of the condescending look Chloe used to belittle service workers and retail staff. "It is a beautiful necklace," Kiara said, her voice confident, melodious and sharp as a scalpel. "It feels much better around my neck than it ever did around yours." She paused, letting the crushing weight of her presence suffocate my sister. She looked down at the woman who had birthed her, hidden her, and abandoned her to protect a country club membership. "Hello, biological mother." The 4 words hung suspended in the air, heavy and lethal as a guillotine blade waiting to drop. The ambient noise of the restaurant outside the heavy mahogany doors seemed to fade into a vacuum. Inside the private dining room, time simply stopped. Nobody moved. Nobody took a breath. The sheer gravitational weight of Kiara's greeting pinned every single person to their chairs. Chloe physically recoiled, pressing her back so hard against the velvet sofa that the upholstery groaned. The flawless, pristine mask she had worn for her entire adult life began to literally melt off her face. A sheen of cold sweat broke out across her forehead, cutting through layers of expensive foundation and setting powder. Her chest heaved in rapid, shallow gasps, pulling the air in, but refusing to let it out. She looked at the towering, regal teenager standing before her, and the absolute terror in her eyes was a total, undeniable confession. Richard and Beatrice were paralyzed. My father sat frozen, his mouth slightly ajar, his hands gripping the edge of the dining table so tightly that his knuckles were bruised white. The authoritative patriarchal bravado he had wielded like a weapon just minutes ago was entirely gone, replaced by the hollow, vacant stare of a man watching a 17-year-old lie detonate right in his face. My mother was even worse. She looked as though she had been struck by lightning. Her eyes darted frantically from Kiara's face to Chloe's, then to the horrified expressions of David's parents, before finally snapping to me. The silent scream trapped in her throat was a masterpiece of agonizing realization. The ghost they had discarded in a sterile clinic had returned draped in diamonds and demanding her reckoning. "I do not know you?" Chloe finally managed to choke out. Her voice was thin, reedy, and vibrating with absolute panic. She shook her head frantically, her perfectly highlighted hair falling in messy strands across her sweaty face. "You are a liar. Maya hired you to do this. Bradley, do not listen to her. She is a stranger." Kiara did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She possessed a terrifying, serene authority that she had learned by watching me dismantle opponents in boardrooms. "A stranger," Kiara repeated, stepping one fraction of an inch closer. She tilted her head, allowing the crystal chandeliers to illuminate the undeniable carbon copy reflection of Chloe's own face. "Look at me. Look at the shape of my jaw. Look at the arch of my eyebrows. You look in the mirror every single morning, Chloe. You know exactly who is standing in front of you. You can lie to your husband, you can lie to these people, but you cannot lie to your own biology." Bradley stood absolutely rigid next to his wife. He was a conservative old money purist, a man obsessed with lineage and purity, and he was currently doing the mental math that would destroy his reality. He stared at Kiara's face, tracing the sharp cheekbones and the almond-shaped eyes. Then he looked down at his wife, who was currently hyperventilating, a sweaty, sobbing mess cowering against the sofa cushions. The resemblance was not just striking. It was a genetic fingerprint stamped directly onto the scene. "Wait!" Bradley breathed, the horrifying truth clicking into place. The pieces of the puzzle aligned in his mind with ruthless precision. He looked at my parents, who were incapable of making eye contact with him. He looked at me sitting perfectly composed with David standing by my side. Then he looked back at the terrified, trembling woman he called his wife. 17 years ago. You were 17. Maya was 15. "Do not say it, Bradley," Chloe sobbed, reaching out with a trembling hand to grab his suit jacket. "Please do not say it. Maya is crazy. They're trying to ruin us. You know I was a virgin when we met. You know my family." "Do not touch me!" Bradley roared violently, slapping her hand away. The sheer volume of his voice made my mother flinch violently in her seat. He backed away from Chloe as if she were carrying a deadly contagion. "You lied to me. You sat here holding my hand, weeping over an abandoned niece while looking directly at the daughter you threw away to save your own miserable reputation. You pawned my grandmother's necklace to pay for your degenerate gambling addiction, and you let me sit here and interrogate your sister about her morals." My mother finally snapped out of her paralysis. Her survival instinct kicked in, driving her to attempt one last, desperate manipulation. "Security." Beatrice shrieked, jumping to her feet. "Someone call security right now. Remove this girl from the premises. She is trespassing. She is trespassing on a private family event." David stepped smoothly into the center of the room, placing himself deliberately between my mother and Kiara. His presence was a solid, immovable wall of legal authority. "You will not call security," Beatrice. David stated, his voice a deep, resonant warning that completely silenced her frantic screaming. "And you will not raise your voice at her again. If you or anyone else in this room attempts to touch her, or intimidate her, or remove her from this restaurant, I will personally have you arrested for assaulting my legally adopted future stepdaughter." David's parents, Marcus and Sarah, gasped in unison. The final piece of the puzzle slotted into place for them. The narrative of the reckless, heartless Maya evaporated entirely, replaced by the profound awe-inspiring reality of what I had actually done. I had not abandoned a child. I had spent years building an empire so I could return and rescue the child my sister had discarded. My father slumped back in his chair. He looked physically ill. The commanding patriarch was gone, leaving behind nothing but a hollow, cowardly man who had sacrificed his youngest daughter to protect a lie. He looked at Kiara, taking in the expensive emerald silk, the vintage heirloom diamonds, the fierce intelligence in her eyes, and the undeniable fact that she was completely out of his reach. He could not bully her. He could not hide her. She was a living testament to his failure. Chloe completely broke down. The flawless, arrogant society wife was gone. Her foundation had quite literally melted off her face, leaving her blotchy and red. Sweat dripped down her neck, staining the collar of her expensive dress. She curled her knees to her chest right there on the velvet sofa, sobbing hysterically, a pathetic, shattered portrait of a woman whose entire existence had just been exposed as a cheap, desperate fraud. Kiara looked down at the sobbing mess of the woman who had birthed her. There was no sadness in Kiara's expression, no longing for a mother's embrace. There was only the clinical, detached pity of someone looking at a stranger making a fool of themselves. You told everyone that Maya abandoned her child because she thought it was a parasite ruining her youth, Kiara said smoothly, ensuring her voice carried to every corner of the room. You projected your own cowardly, pathetic reality onto the only person in this family who actually possessed any strength. You threw me in the trash so you could play dress-up in high society. But Maya found me. Maya raised me. Maya gave me the world you were too selfish to provide. So do not cry for me, Chloe. Cry for yourself. Because your entire life is a lie and the whole world is about to know it. I remained seated, watching the total systemic collapse of the people who had tortured me for 17 years. The revenge was not just sweet, it was absolute. It was a surgical strike that left no survivors. I took another slow, deeply satisfying sip of my wine. The show was not over yet, but the climax had been nothing short of spectacular. Bradley stood frozen for exactly 3 seconds. The blood rushing back to his face turned his complexion a dangerous, volatile shade of crimson. He turned his imposing frame toward the sofa, blocking Chloe's only physical escape route. The aristocratic, refined gentleman from a pristine lineage was gone. In his place stood a man realizing he had anchored his entire legacy to a colossal, humiliating fraud. Answer the question, Chloe Bradley commanded. His voice was completely devoid of the patronizing affection he had displayed just minutes earlier. It was a cold, flat demand that sent a visible tremor through my sister's body. Is that your daughter? And did you sell my family's heirloom to cover a gambling debt? Chloe scrambled backward on the velvet cushions, her manicured hands desperately grabbing at Bradley's suit jacket. No, Bradley, you have to listen to me, she stammered, her words tumbling out in a frantic, uncoordinated rush. She is confused. Maya put her up to this. Maya hired her to ruin us because she is jealous. It was a surrogate situation. I was just helping a friend in high school. I mean, it was Maya's mistake, but my name was on the clinic door because she stole my identification. Bradley stared at her, his expression twisting into absolute disgust. The sheer stupidity of her defense was insulting his intelligence. She stole your identification when she was 15 years old, Bradley asked, his tone dripping with lethal sarcasm. And my grandmother's necklace. Did Maya steal that too? Did Maya force you to walk into a pawn shop and trade a century of my family's history for quick cash? Chloe shook her head violently, tears carving tracks through her thick foundation. Mom made me do it, Chloe cried, throwing our mother directly under the bus without a second thought. Mom forced me to pawn the necklace. We needed the money for my father's business. The company was failing Bradley. They begged me to save them. I did it to protect my family. Richard stepped forward, his eyes wide with betrayal. Chloe, shut your mouth, my father barked. Bradley shoved Richard back with a hard, uncompromising glare. Do not speak to my wife. Bradley snapped, though the word wife sounded like poison in his mouth. He turned his attention back to Chloe, leaning down until he was eye level with her terrified face. You looked me in the eye yesterday morning, Chloe. You looked me in the eye and told me the sapphire was securely locked in our joint safety deposit box. You swore on a Bible that your financial records were flawless ahead of the trust audit. I was robbed, Chloe gasped, pivoting to a brand new lie with breathtaking speed. Someone broke into the house while we were out. I was terrified to tell you. I thought you would be angry that I left the safe unlocked. Bradley let out a sharp, bitter laugh. Robbed. So a master thief bypassed our elite security system, ignored the cash, and electronics took absolutely nothing but a single necklace, and then politely relocked the safe behind them. Do you think I am an idiot, Chloe? Do you think my family amassed our wealth by being stupid enough to believe a story a toddler could see through? David stepped smoothly into the center of the confrontation. His presence was a grounding force of absolute legal authority. There is no need for anyone to guess why the necklace was pawned, Bradley David said. His voice was calm, resonant, and utterly terrifying to my parents. Nor do we need to speculate about who abandoned Kiara. We have the entire confession on tape. My mother let out a strangled gasp. Beatrice lunged forward, her arms outstretched, desperately trying to grab David's phone. "Give that to me," she shrieked. "You have no right to record private conversations. That is illegal." David sidestepped her clumsy attack effortlessly. Actually, Beatrice, Georgia is a one-party consent state. Since Maya was a willing participant in the conversation that took place in her own office, the recording is entirely legal and entirely admissible in court. David unlocked his screen and tapped a single audio file. He turned the volume all the way up, ensuring the sound would carry to every corner of the silent waiting room. Marcus and Sarah leaned forward from the main table, completely gripped by the unraveling spectacle. He pressed play. The pristine, crystal-clear audio of my mother's shrill, unhinged voice filled the private dining room. "You ungrateful, selfish little brat!" The recorded voice of Beatrice screamed, echoing off the expensive wallpaper. "You will wire that money right now. You will save your sister, because you owe this family your very existence." Bradley stiffened, his eyes narrowing as he listened to his mother-in-law's true, unfiltered personality. Then came my father's voice, captured perfectly by the hidden microphone. "She owes people Maya. She made some bad investments. She got in over her head. And then the fatal blow." Chloe's own voice, muffled but unmistakable, crying out from the recording. It started small. "You do not understand the pressure I am under, Maya. There is a private high-stakes circle in Buckhead. I lost a little, then I tried to win it back, and I kept losing. Then I opened offshore online accounts. Bradley's family trust is conducting a comprehensive audit in exactly 12 days. If their accountants see the missing funds, Bradley will find out." Bradley looked down at Chloe. The absolute devastation on his face was a masterpiece. He was listening to his pure, perfect, deeply conservative wife admit to defrauding his family trust and gambling away hundreds of thousands of dollars in illicit offshore betting rings. But the recording was not finished. We heard Beatrice plotting her extortion. "If you do not transfer that money to Chloe by the end of the day, we will go straight to David. We will sit him down and tell him every disgusting detail about the child you abandoned. We will ruin your wedding before you even send out the invitations." And finally, the most damning sentence of all, delivered by Beatrice in a fit of triumphant malice. "We covered up your disgrace 17 years ago so Chloe could marry into Bradley's elite family. We protected you so she could be perfect." David pressed the screen, stopping the audio. The silence that rushed back into the room was heavier than concrete. My parents stood frozen, their mouths open, completely stripped of their dignity, their leverage, and their lies. They had just been broadcast to the entire room as manipulative, greedy extortionists who used an innocent child as a bargaining chip to fund a gambling addiction. Marcus and Sarah looked at my family with an expression of profound, unfiltered revulsion. Sarah visibly shuddered, moving her chair further away from the velvet sofa. They were looking at monsters, and they finally knew it. Bradley slowly backed away from the sofa. He looked at Chloe as if she were covered in a highly contagious disease. He did not yell. He did not scream. His anger had bypassed rage and settled into a freezing, terrifying clarity. "You sold my grandmother's necklace to pay off illegal bookies," Bradley stated, his voice devoid of any emotion. "You birthed a child through her in a state facility, and let your teenage sister take the blame so you could trick me into marrying you. Your entire existence is a parasite feeding off my family's name." Chloe dropped to her knees right there on the carpet. She reached out, trying to grab the hem of Bradley's trousers. "Bradley, please," she sobbed, her voice raw and jagged. "I love you. I did it because I wanted to be perfect for you. I was so scared of losing you. I will go to rehab. I will do whatever you want. Please do not leave me." "Audio forensics do not lie, Chloe," David said, shutting down her pathetic display. "Your voice is remarkably clear when you are committing extortion. You demanded $500,000 from my fiancé to cover up your crimes. You thought you were holding a loaded gun, but you were just digging your own grave." My father, desperately clinging to the last shred of his shattered ego, pointed a trembling finger at David. "You have no idea what you are getting involved in." Richard sputtered, his voice cracking under the strain of his mounting panic. "You are a corporate attorney, David. You do not understand family dynamics. Maya has brainwashed you. She has twisted the facts to make herself look like a saint. You cannot possibly believe this absurd narrative." David let out a rich, genuine laugh that echoed off the crystal chandeliers. It was not a cruel laugh, but a deeply amused one, the sound of a predator watching its prey run directly into a dead end. "That is where you are catastrophically mistaken," Richard David replied, his tone shifting into absolute professional command. "I do practice corporate litigation, but my primary specialty, the foundation of my private practice, is high net worth family law and sealed guardianships." My mother's breath hitched. She looked at David, then at me, her eyes widening as the implications of his words began to form a terrifying picture in her mind. "Maya and I did not meet by chance at some charity gala." David continued, stepping closer to the table so his voice would carry with undeniable clarity. 3 years ago, your daughter walked into my private office seeking the best legal representation in the state of Georgia. She brought with her a mountain of paperwork. I read every single original medical file from that private clinic. I tracked the transfer records to the state facility. I reviewed the DNA tests that definitively proved Chloe's biological maternity. I handled the sealed, highly classified legal proceedings that officially terminated your parental rights and established Maya as Kiara's permanent legal guardian. The color drained completely from my father's face. He stumbled backward, his legs hitting the edge of a dining chair, sending it screeching across the hardwood floor. "I have known the absolute truth about your family since the very first day I asked your daughter to dinner," David stated, delivering the final crushing blow to their delusion. "I have known exactly what kind of people you are for 3 years. My parents have known. Kiara has known. You walked into this restaurant tonight thinking you were going to drop a bomb on my family, completely unaware that you were stepping into a tribunal where the jury had already convicted you." Beatrice let out a high, thin wail. She looked across the table at Marcus and Sarah. David's parents did not look away. Sarah, who had played the role of the horrified future mother-in-law to absolute perfection, simply picked up her wine glass and took a graceful sip. Marcus gave my father a cold, disgusted nod, confirming that they had been fully complicit in this masterful trap from the moment the appetizers were served. "You set us up," my mother gasped, clutching her chest as if she were having a heart attack. "You invited us here to humiliate us." "I did not invite you here to humiliate you, Beatrice," I said, stepping out from behind David and reclaiming the center of the room. "You humiliated yourselves. You could have come to my rehearsal dinner, eaten your free meal, and gone home in peace. But your toxic need to destroy me, your desperate obsession with maintaining your own superiority drove you to pull the trigger. I just made sure the barrel was pointed squarely at your own heads." Kiara, who had been watching her biological grandparents with quiet disdain, walked smoothly past Chloe's sobbing form. She did not offer a single word of comfort to the woman shivering on the floor. Instead, Kiara walked directly over to Sarah. David's mother stood up and warmly embraced my daughter, kissing her on the cheek and whispering how beautiful she looked in the emerald dress. The visual of David's elite old money family openly embracing the child my parents had discarded was a fatal strike to my mother's social climbing heart. Bradley, having seen and heard enough to completely shatter his reality, turned his back on Chloe. He buttoned his suit jacket, his face a mask of absolute unforgiving stone. "I will have my attorneys contact you in the morning," Chloe Bradley said, not even looking down at her. "Do not return to my house tonight. Do not return ever. If you attempt to access our bank accounts, I will have you arrested for theft. You are finished." Bradley turned to me, gave a stiff formal nod of respect, and then marched out of the VIP dining room. The heavy mahogany doors swung shut behind him, sealing Chloe's fate. She let out a guttural scream, burying her face in the carpet, mourning the loss of her wealth and status, with far more passion than she ever mourned the loss of her child. My father turned to me, his eyes wild, his hands shaking. "Maya, please." Richard begged, his voice stripped of all its former arrogance. "We are your parents. You have proved your point. You won." Bradley left her. "Chloe has nothing. We are ruined socially. Please just let us go home. Let us leave in peace." I looked at the broken man standing before me. He was asking for mercy, a concept he had never extended to me when I was a terrified 15-year-old girl begging not to be forced into a lie. "Go home," I repeated, tasting the word on my tongue. I reached into my sleek designer tote bag resting on a nearby chair. "That is an interesting choice of words, Richard." I pulled out a thick, heavy manila folder. I walked up to the dining table and tossed it right into the center of the pristine white linen. The folder landed with a heavy, satisfying thud, knocking over a crystal water glass. The water spilled across the table, soaking into the fabric, but nobody moved to clean it up. "Did you honestly think I would build an entire venture capital empire and not conduct a comprehensive financial background check on my own family?" The second Chloe marched into my office demanding $500,000, I asked, my voice echoing off the walls. "I do not just manage money, I acquire distressed assets." My father stared at the manila folder. He recognized the red embossed seal of his primary mortgage lender stamped across the front cover. His breathing became erratic, his chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow bursts. "Your construction business has been secretly bleeding capital for 4 years." Richard Rice stated, laying out his failures for everyone to hear. "You took out a second mortgage on that pristine suburban mansion you love to boast about. When Chloe's gambling debts started eating into your reserves, you took out a third. You have been shuffling money around like a street hustler playing a shell game, but the music stopped. You defaulted on your primary loan 90 days ago. The bank officially initiated foreclosure proceedings last week." Beatrice stopped wailing. She looked at Richard, her eyes wide with a brand new, entirely different kind of terror. "Richard, what is she talking about?" Beatrice demanded, her voice shrill. "Tell me she is lying. Tell me our house is fine." Richard could not speak. He just stared at the folder, his spirit completely broken. "The bank was going to auction the property off to the highest bidder by the end of the month," I continued, my voice smooth and merciless. "But Crown and Roots Holdings specializes in aggressive debt acquisition. I contacted your lender. I paid off the outstanding balance of your defaulted loans in cash. I bought your debt, Richard. I bought the deed." I paused, letting the crushing reality of their situation settle over them. "I am not just your discarded daughter anymore," I said, leaning closer so they could see the absolute, unwavering finality in my eyes. "I am your landlord." My mother let out a sharp gasp, clutching her throat as if she were suffocating. "You bought our house?" Beatrice whispered, the magnitude of her defeat finally breaking her mind. "You own our home." "It is not your home anymore, Beatrice," I corrected her coldly. "It is my property. And considering the fact that you attempted to extort me for $500,000 and conspired to ruin my marriage, I find you to be highly undesirable tenants." I tapped my manicured fingernail against the thick manila folder. Inside that envelope is a legally binding court-approved eviction notice. You have exactly 24 hours to pack whatever fits into your cars and vacate my property. If you are not completely gone by tomorrow evening, I will have the county sheriff physically remove you for trespassing, and I will have all of your remaining possessions thrown into a dumpster." My father dropped to his knees. The proud, imposing patriarch folded onto the restaurant floor, sobbing openly. He reached out toward me, his hands trembling. "Maya, please." Richard wept. "We have nowhere to go. We have no money. You cannot put us on the street. We are your family." I looked down at him. I remembered the morning of my 18th birthday, standing on the porch with 2 trash bags full of my clothes, begging this exact man for just a few more weeks to figure things out. I remembered him checking his watch and telling me to get off his property. I felt absolutely nothing for him. "You are legally adults," I said, echoing the exact words he had spoken to me 17 years ago. "I have fulfilled my legal obligation to listen to you speak. Now take your trash and get out. Do not call me. Do not ask for money. Do not tell anyone you are related to me. As far as I am concerned, I only have a daughter and a husband." I turned my back on them and walked over to David. He wrapped his arm around my waist, pulling me close. Kiara stood on my other side, her head held high. We stood together, a real unbreakable family, and watched as restaurant security arrived to escort Richard, Beatrice, and Chloe out of the building, leaving them with absolutely nothing but the clothes on their backs and the crushing weight of their own destruction. Bradley halted just inches from the heavy mahogany doors. The polished wood was swinging shut, but he caught the brass handle, his knuckles white with suppressed rage. He turned slowly, his gaze sweeping over the wreckage of his marriage. He did not look at David. He did not look at me. His eyes locked onto Chloe, who was still crumpled on the carpet, her designer dress soaked with her own desperate tears. Bradley raised his left hand. The ambient lighting caught the gleam of his heavy platinum wedding band. With a single fluid motion, he slid the ring off his finger. He did not throw it in a fit of passion. He simply tossed it onto the dining table. The heavy metal clinked sharply against a crystal wineglass, a small defining sound that officially signaled the death of Chloe's elite existence. Bradley pulled his phone from his pocket and dialed a number, holding the device to his ear. The private dining room was so quiet that everyone could hear the line connecting. Charles Bradley said, his voice echoing with absolute unforgiving authority. "I need you to draft emergency divorce papers immediately. Cite egregious financial fraud and gross misrepresentation. I want all joint accounts frozen within the hour. Cancel every credit card in her name. Revoke her access to the Thornton Family Trust, the Buckhead Estate, and all vacation properties. She is to be entirely disinherited from this family effective immediately. Have the papers ready for my signature by tomorrow morning." Chloe let out a sound that barely resembled a human voice. It was a guttural, primal screech of a woman watching her kingdom burn to ash. She scrambled across the floor, her manicured hands grasping blindly at the empty air, but Bradley had already turned his back. He stepped through the doorway and let the heavy doors click shut behind him, severing her connection to his wealth and status forever. She was no longer a Thornton. She was just a woman with a mountain of illegal gambling debt to dangerous people and a 24-hour eviction notice hanging over her head. The restaurant manager stepped forward, clearing his throat to break the spell. 2 large, impeccably dressed security guards flanked him, their stances rigid and professional. "Mr. and Mrs. Adams," the manager said, his tone dripping with the kind of polite disdain reserved for unruly patrons. "I must ask you to vacate the premises immediately. Your behavior is disrupting the establishment, and your presence is no longer welcome here or at any of our affiliated properties." My mother tried to stand up. Beatrice attempted to smooth down the front of her expensive silk dress, a pathetic, reflexive attempt to reclaim her shattered dignity. Her hands were shaking so violently that she could barely grasp her designer clutch. She looked at Marcus and Sarah, David's parents, opening her mouth to offer one last desperate excuse. Sarah simply picked up her napkin, dabbed her lips, and turned her face away, completely ignoring her. My father did not even try to look dignified. Richard hauled himself off the floor, his shoulders slumped, his chest hollowed out. He looked exactly like a man who realized he had traded his soul for a social standing that had just evaporated into thin air. He grabbed Chloe by the arm, hauling his weeping, catatonic golden child up from the carpet. She could barely stand on her own feet, her knees buckling under the crushing realization that the offshore bookies would soon come collecting, and she had absolutely no money to pay them. The security guards did not offer them a private exit. They marched my family straight out of the VIP room and directly through the main dining hall of Atlanta's most exclusive restaurant. It was Friday night. The dining room was packed with the exact people my parents worshipped. Corporate executives, country club board members, elite alumni, and prominent socialites all stopped eating. Forks were lowered, wine glasses were set down. A wave of hushed, scandalized whispers rolled across the room as the Adams family was marched past the tables by security. Beatrice tried to hide her face behind her purse, turning her head away from the piercing, judgmental stares. A prominent socialite she regularly played tennis with made eye contact, then deliberately turned her back as Beatrice passed by. It was the ultimate unspoken excommunication from their high society circle. Richard stared straight ahead, his jaw locked, his face burning a deep, humiliated crimson. People were pulling out their phones. Messages were already being typed. The story of their catastrophic disgrace would be the only topic of conversation at every elite brunch and golf game by tomorrow morning. I stood in the VIP room with David and Kiara, watching them disappear into the lobby. They were walking out into the humid Atlanta night with absolutely nothing. They had no home to return to, only a foreclosed mansion they were legally required to vacate by tomorrow evening. They had no cash reserves, having drained their accounts to fund Chloe's fake lifestyle. They were facing the wrath of illegal bookies, the crushing reality of bankruptcy, and the total unforgiving isolation of being blacklisted by everyone they ever sought to impress. They thought they could use my past to destroy my future. They thought they could manipulate an innocent child's existence to extort money and maintain their false kingdom. Instead, the sheer weight of their own greed and lies had crushed them flat. There was no pity in my heart as the restaurant manager quietly closed the doors, giving us back our privacy. The toxic, suffocating presence of Richard, Beatrice, and Chloe was gone, scrubbed clean from my life permanently. The slate was wiped, the debts were paid, and the villains had been cast out into the dark. 4 days later, the heavy, suffocating humidity of Atlanta gave way to a perfectly crisp and golden afternoon. The venue we chose was a sprawling historic estate, enveloped in cascading wisteria and thousands of white roses. For the first time in my entire life, I breathed in air that was completely and utterly free of poison. There were no tense whispers in the corners. There was no one scrutinizing the floral arrangements to see if they measured up to elite country club standards. There was no Richard, no Beatrice, and certainly no Chloe. The estate was filled only with people who genuinely wanted to see us thrive. Inside the bridal suite, I stood before a tall, gilded mirror, adjusting the delicate lace sleeves of my custom gown. The door clicked open and Kiara walked in. She was wearing a stunning champagne-colored dress, her dark hair styled in soft, elegant waves. The vintage sapphire necklace she wore at the restaurant was safely tucked away, replaced today by a simple diamond pendant I had given her that morning. She walked over and gently smoothed the long silk train of my wedding gown, meeting my eyes in the reflection. We did not need to say a single word. The unbreakable bond between us spoke volumes. We had survived their fire and emerged completely untouchable. When the string quartet began to play their beautiful melody, I did not have a father waiting outside the wooden doors to give me away. I did not need a man who viewed me as a liability to walk me toward my future. I linked my arm firmly through Kiara's. Together we stepped out into the brilliant afternoon sunlight. The guests rose to their feet. At the end of the long petal-strewn aisle, David stood waiting. He looked incredibly handsome in his tailored tuxedo, his eyes shining with a profound, unwavering love. In the front row, Marcus and Sarah watched us approach with genuine tears of joy. They had fully embraced Kiara over the last few days, treating her with the absolute adoration and respect of true loving grandparents. There was no judgment, no scandal, and no hesitation. They were simply proud to call us family. As Kiara and I reached the altar, she kissed my cheek, handed me off to David, and took her rightful place by my side as my maid of honor. The ceremony was flawless. It was a celebration of victory, of truth, and of a love built on an unshakable foundation of absolute transparency. Hours later, the evening reception was in full swing under a gorgeous canopy of twinkling fairy lights. A live jazz band played a smooth, upbeat rhythm, and the marble dance floor was packed with laughing guests. I stood near the edge of the stone terrace, a crystal flute of vintage champagne in my hand, taking it all in. David was laughing heartily with his father nearby, and Kiara was teaching Sarah a new dance move, spinning her around to the music. It was a picture of perfect, unadulterated joy. I turned my gaze away from the party and looked directly forward. I offer a soft, victorious smile, raising my champagne glass in a silent, confident toast to everyone watching. People spend their entire lives bound by the heavy guilt of genetics. They let themselves be drained, manipulated, and destroyed by people who share their last names simply because society tells them they have to. But the ultimate truth is, you do not owe your life to anyone who uses your pain as a stepping stone. You do not owe your loyalty to people who would gladly lock you in the dark just so they can shine. I built an empire from the ashes they left me in. I reclaimed the daughter they tried to erase from existence. I married a man who stood like a fortress against their lies. Family is not defined by the blood in your veins. It is defined by the people who refuse to let you bleed alone. I take a slow, satisfying sip of my champagne.